What if everything you thought you knew about the ancient world was wrong? What if there was a time when giants walked the earth alongside humans? What if powerful beings from heaven came down and changed the course of history forever? For thousands of years, people have told stories about giants. Every culture on earth has legends about huge people who lived long ago. The Bible talks about them too, but most people think these are just fairy tales or made-up stories. Today, we are going to discover the truth. We will learn about an ancient book that tells us exactly what happened. This book is called the Book of Enoch. It was written thousands of years ago, but it tells a story that will shock you. The Book of Enoch explains where giants came from. It tells us about angels who left heaven and came to earth. These angels did something they were not supposed to do. They married human women and had children with them. Their children were not normal humans. They were giants. These giants were not friendly. They were dangerous and evil. They caused so much trouble that God had to send a great flood to stop them. But even after the flood, giants came back. The Bible tells us about many of these giants. Some had names like Goliath and King Og. For many years, scholars and religious leaders did not want to talk about the Book of Enoch. They thought it was too strange or scary. But now, more and more people are reading it. They are learning that it might tell us the real truth about what happened long ago. We will explore ancient legends from around the world. We will look at what archaeologists have found. We will see how different cultures all tell similar stories about giants. By the end of our journey, you will understand why this ancient mystery matters so much today. Get ready to learn about the Nephilim. Get ready to discover the truth about the giants who once ruled the earth. Get ready to see how the Book of Enoch has the proof that changes everything we thought we knew about human history. Chapter 1. Before the Flood. The world God created. To understand the story of the giants, we must first go back to the very beginning. We must learn about the world as God made it, before anything went wrong. The Bible tells us that God created the world in 6 days. On the first day, He made light and separated it from darkness. On the second day, He made the sky and the waters above and below. On the third day, He made dry land and filled it with plants and trees. On the fourth day, He put the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. On the fifth day, He filled the waters with fish and the sky with birds. On the sixth day, He made all the animals that walk on land. But the most special thing God made was man. The Bible says God formed the first man, Adam, from the dust of the ground. Then God breathed into Adam's nose, and Adam became a living person. God also made a beautiful garden called Eden and put Adam there to take care of it. God saw that it was not good for Adam to be alone. So He made Eve from one of Adam's ribs. Adam and Eve were perfect. They had no sin. They could talk with God face to face. They ruled over all the animals. The world was peaceful and beautiful. But God had also created another kind of being before He made humans. These beings were called angels. Angels were spiritual beings who lived in heaven with God. They were very powerful and very smart. Some angels had special jobs. Some were warriors who fought God's battles. Others were messengers who carried God's words to people. Still others were watchers who observed what happened on earth. The most important angels were called archangels. Michael was the great warrior angel who led God's army. Gabriel was God's special messenger. Raphael was the healing angel. And there was another archangel whose name was Lucifer, which means light bearer. Lucifer was beautiful and powerful, but he became proud and wanted to be like God. One day, Lucifer decided to rebel against God. He convinced many other angels to join him. They thought they could fight against God and win, but they were wrong. Michael and the loyal angels fought against Lucifer and his rebels. The battle was terrible, but God's side won. God cast Lucifer and his rebel angels out of heaven. Lucifer became known as Satan, which means enemy. The other rebel angels became known as demons or fallen angels. They could no longer live in heaven with God, but they were still very powerful. Meanwhile, on earth, something sad happened to Adam and Eve. Satan came to them in the form of a snake and tricked Eve into eating fruit from the tree that God had told them not to touch. Adam also ate the fruit. This was the first sin, and it changed everything. Because of their sin, Adam and Eve could no longer live in the perfect garden. God sent them out into the world. Now they would have to work hard to grow food. They would get sick and grow old and eventually die. Worst of all, they could no longer talk with God face to face like they used to. Adam and Eve had children. Their first son was named Cain, and their second son was named Abel. But sin was now in the world, and it caused more problems. Cain became jealous of his brother Abel and killed him. This was the first murder. As time went on, Adam and Eve had many more children. These children had children of their own. Soon, there were many people living on the earth. Some of these people tried to follow God and do what was right. Others turned away from God and did evil things. The Bible tells us about two different family lines. One came from Abel and later from another son named Seth. The people in Seth's family line were called sons of God because they tried to worship God and live good lives. The other family line came from Cain. These people moved far away from God and became more and more wicked. For many generations, the sons of God stayed separate from the wicked people. They lived in different places and did not marry each other. This was important because God wanted his people to stay pure and not learn evil ways from the wicked people. But as more and more people were born, the earth became very crowded. The sons of God and the daughters of the wicked people began to see each other more often. The daughters of the wicked people were very beautiful, and the sons of God began to want to marry them. This was the beginning of a great problem that would change the world forever. When the sons of God began to mix with the daughters of men, something terrible happened. But this was not the only problem. At the same time, other powerful beings were also looking down at the earth and making plans of their own. High above the earth, in the spiritual realm, some of the angels who had remained loyal to God were given a special job. They were called Watchers because their task was to watch over the earth and the humans who lived there. These Watchers were supposed to observe and report back to God, but they were not supposed to interfere with human life. At first, the Watchers did their job well. They watched the humans and saw how they lived. They saw the good things people did and the bad things too. They reported everything back to God in heaven. But as they watched, something began to change in their hearts. The Watchers began to desire the things they saw on earth. They saw how beautiful the human women were. They saw how humans could have families and children. They began to want these things for themselves, even though angels were not supposed to have such desires. This desire grew stronger and stronger in the hearts of some of the Watchers. They began to make a plan that would change everything. They decided they would leave their places in heaven and come down to earth. They would take human wives and live like humans. What the Watchers did not understand was that their plan would bring disaster to the whole world. When spiritual beings mixed with physical beings, the result would be something that God never intended. The children of such unions would not be normal humans. They would be something else entirely. They would be giants. Chapter 2. The Watchers come to earth. The Book of Enoch tells us exactly what happened when the Watchers made their terrible decision. This ancient book gives us details that are not found anywhere else. According to the Book of Enoch, there were 200 Watchers who decided to rebel against God. They were not ordinary angels. They were powerful and important angels who had been given great responsibility, but they chose to give up their positions in heaven for earthly desires. The leader of these rebel Watchers was named Semjaza. He was the one who first suggested the plan to come to earth and take human wives. But at first, even he was afraid to do it alone. He knew that God would be very angry if the Watchers left their proper place. So Semjaza said to the other Watchers, "I am afraid to do this great sin by myself. If I am the only one who does it, I will have to bear all the punishment alone. But if we all do it together, we will all share the blame and the punishment." The other Watchers agreed to join Semjaza in his rebellion. They all made a promise to each other. They swore an oath that they would all go down to earth together, and they would all take human wives. This way, none of them could change their mind later and leave the others to face God's anger alone. The Book of Enoch even tells us the names of the leaders among these rebel Watchers. Besides Semjaza, there was Azazel, who would teach humans how to make weapons and jewelry. There was Armaros, who taught the solving of spells. There was Barakijal, who taught astrology. There was Kokabal, who taught the signs of the stars. There were many others, each with their own area of knowledge that they would later share with humans. When the 200 Watchers had made their oath, they began to descend from heaven to earth. This was not like when angels had visited earth before as messengers from God. This time, they were coming to stay. They were abandoning their heavenly positions forever. The Bible gives us a hint about what happened in the book of Genesis, chapter 6. It says, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Many Bible scholars believe that these sons of God, mentioned in Genesis, were the Watchers. The term sons of God in the Old Testament often refers to angels or other heavenly beings. These Watchers saw the beautiful daughters of men and decided to marry them. But the Book of Enoch tells us much more detail about what really happened. It explains that the Watchers did not just quietly come to Earth and blend in with human society. Instead, they came with great power and made themselves known as mighty beings. The Watchers chose a special place to begin their rebellion. According to the Book of Enoch, they came down on Mount Hermon. This mountain is located in the area that is now between Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. Mount Hermon was the highest mountain in that region, and it seemed fitting that these heavenly beings would choose such a high place to make their home on earth. When the Watchers arrived on Mount Hermon, they were no longer invisible spirits. They took on physical bodies that looked like humans, but they were much bigger and stronger than regular people. They were also much more beautiful and impressive than any human had ever been. The humans who lived near Mount Hermon were amazed when they saw these powerful beings. The Watchers seemed like gods to them. They were taller than any human, stronger than any human, and more intelligent than any human. They knew things that no human knew. They could do things that no human could do. At first, many humans were afraid of them, Watchers. These beings were clearly not ordinary people. They had an otherworldly power and presence that made humans feel small and weak in comparison. But the Watchers did not come as conquerors. Instead, they came offering gifts and knowledge. The Watchers began to choose wives from among the most beautiful women they could find. These women were honored to be chosen by such powerful beings. To be selected as the wife of one of these godlike creatures seemed like the greatest blessing a woman could receive. But what the humans did not understand was that this was the beginning of the greatest disaster the world had ever seen. When spiritual beings from heaven mixed with physical beings from earth, the result would be children who were neither fully spiritual nor fully human. These children would have the power of angels, but the physical form of humans, only much larger and stronger. The Watchers also did not realize the full consequences of what they were doing. They thought they were simply choosing to live a different kind of life. They wanted to experience the pleasures and relationships that they had observed among humans. But they were actually corrupting the natural order that God had established. God had created angels to be spiritual beings who served him in heaven. He had created humans to be physical beings who lived on earth and had dominion over the animals and plants. These two kinds of beings were never meant to mix. When they did mix, it created something that was an abomination in God's sight. As the Watchers began their new lives on earth, they also began to teach the humans many things that humans were not supposed to know. These were secrets of heaven that God had not intended for humans to learn. This knowledge would cause even more problems than the marriages between Watchers and human women. The arrival of the Watchers on earth marked the beginning of a new and terrible age. It was an age when the line between heaven and earth became blurred. It was an age when humans would learn things that would corrupt them and lead them into great wickedness. It was an age when giants would be born and would terrorize the world. Most importantly, it was an age that would eventually force God to take drastic action to save the human race from complete corruption. The decision of the 200 Watchers to abandon heaven for earth would ultimately lead to the great flood that would destroy almost all life on the planet. Chapter 3: The Forbidden Marriage. When the Watchers took human wives, they broke one of the most fundamental laws of creation. The consequences of their actions would echo through all of history. The Book of Enoch describes in detail how the marriages between the Watchers and human women took place. These were not ordinary weddings like we might see today. These were unions between beings from two completely different realms of existence. Each of the 200 Watchers chose a woman to be his wife. They did not ask permission from the women's fathers or follow any of the normal customs that humans used when they got married. Instead, they simply took the women they wanted because they had the power to do so. The human women were amazed by their new husbands. These Watchers were incredibly handsome and strong. They were much taller than any human man, and they had an otherworldly beauty that was both attractive and frightening. Their eyes seemed to shine with an inner light, and their voices had a power that could make humans obey without question. The Watchers also brought gifts to their wives that no human had ever seen before. They had knowledge of precious metals and how to work with them. They knew how to make beautiful jewelry and ornaments. They understood the secrets of cosmetics and perfumes that could make women even more beautiful. But these gifts came with a terrible price. The knowledge that the Watchers shared was not meant for humans to have. God had kept these secrets hidden for good reasons. When humans learned these things, it began to change them in ways that were not good. The marriages between Watchers and human women were also changing the Watchers themselves. These angels had been created to serve God and to live in His presence. But now they were focused entirely on earthly pleasures and earthly relationships. They were forgetting their true purpose and their true nature. As time passed, the human wives of the Watchers became pregnant. This should have been impossible. Angels were spiritual beings who were not supposed to be able to have children with physical beings. But somehow, these unions produced offspring. The pregnancies were unlike any that human women had ever experienced. The babies growing inside them were much larger than normal human babies. The women suffered greatly as these unusual children developed. Many of them became sick and weak because their bodies were not designed to carry such powerful beings. During their pregnancies, the women began to have strange dreams and visions. They could sense that the children they were carrying were not ordinary humans. These babies seemed to have a spiritual power even before they were born. Sometimes the mothers could feel their unborn children moving with supernatural strength. The other humans who lived near the Watchers began to notice that something was very wrong. The women who had married these strange beings were changing. They were becoming proud and arrogant. They thought they were better than other people because they had been chosen by such powerful husbands. The influence of the Watchers was also spreading to other humans in the community. People began to worship the Watchers as if they were gods. They brought gifts and offerings to them. They asked the Watchers to use their power to help them or to harm their enemies. This was exactly what God had never wanted to happen. Humans were supposed to worship only God, not angels or any other created beings. But the Watchers were so impressive and powerful that many humans found it easy to believe they were gods who deserved worship. The Watchers enjoyed being worshipped by humans. It made them feel important and powerful. They began to think of themselves as rulers over the humans rather than as servants of God. This pride was the same sin that had caused Lucifer to fall from heaven in the first place. As the time came for the children of the Watchers to be born, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. What would these offspring look like? What kind of power would they have? How would they affect the world? The first births were difficult and painful. The human mothers struggled to deliver babies that were much larger than any human baby should be. Some of the mothers died in childbirth because their bodies could not handle the strain. But when the children were finally born, everyone could see immediately that they were not normal humans. These babies were huge, even as newborns. They grew at an incredible rate. Within a short time, they were larger than adult humans. The children had the physical appearance of humans, but they were much bigger and stronger. They also seemed to inherit some of the supernatural abilities of their fathers. They could do things that no human could do. They were faster, stronger, and more intelligent than any ordinary person. These children became known as the Nephilim, which means the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. They were also called giants because of their enormous size. The Book of Enoch says that they grew to be 3,000 ells tall, which would be about 3,000 feet high. This might be an exaggeration to show how incredibly large they were, but it makes clear that these were not ordinary people. The birth of the Nephilim marked a turning point in human history. These giant children of the Watchers would grow up to become the most powerful and terrifying beings the world had ever seen. They would rule over ordinary humans with great cruelty. They would consume the resources of the earth and spread violence and wickedness everywhere they went. The forbidden marriages between the Watchers and human women had produced a race of beings that should never have existed. These giants were neither fully angel nor fully human, but something in between that was an abomination to God and a curse to the world. Chapter 4. The Birth of the Giants. When the Nephilim were born, the world had never seen anything like them. These were not just large people. They were something entirely new and terrifying. The Book of Enoch tells us that the children of the Watchers and human women were giants from the moment they were born. Even as babies, they were much bigger than any human child. But their size was not the most frightening thing about them. It was their appetites that made them truly dangerous. These giant babies were always hungry. They ate much more food than normal babies, and they grew incredibly fast. Within a few months, a Nephilim child would be as large as a grown human adult. Within a year, they would be much larger than any human who had ever lived. As they grew, their appetites grew with them. Soon, the giant children were eating more food in one day than a normal family would eat in a week. Their mothers and fathers had to work constantly just to find enough food to feed them. The giants seemed to be hungry all the time, no matter how much they ate. The human communities where these giants lived began to suffer. All the food that people had grown and stored was being consumed by these enormous beings. Farmers could not grow crops fast enough to keep up with the giants' appetites. Hunters could not catch enough animals to satisfy their hunger. But the problems did not stop with just eating a lot of food. As the giants grew larger and stronger, they also became more demanding and violent. They expected humans to serve them and bring them whatever they wanted. If humans did not obey quickly enough, the giants would become angry and use their great strength to force people to do what they demanded. The giants also inherited some of the supernatural abilities of their Watcher fathers. They were not just big and strong. They also had powers that normal humans did not have. Some could move faster than any human could run. Others seemed to be able to sense things that were happening far away. Still others appeared to have an unnatural intelligence that allowed them to solve problems that puzzled ordinary people. As more and more giant children were born, they began to form their own society, separate from ordinary humans. They saw themselves as a superior race that was meant to rule over the smaller, weaker humans. They had no respect for human life or human feelings. To them, humans were just servants who existed to provide food and labor. The giants also learned skills and knowledge from their Watcher fathers that gave them even more power over humans. They learned how to make weapons that were much better than anything humans had ever created. They learned how to build stronger buildings and more effective tools. This knowledge made them even more dangerous and dominant. Some of the giants grew to be incredibly large. The Book of Enoch mentions different sizes, but all of them were much bigger than any human. Some ancient sources say that certain giants were hundreds of feet tall, like walking mountains. Others were smaller, but still much larger than the tallest human. The names of some of these giants have been preserved in ancient writings. There were giants named Ohia and Hahia, who were among the first and most powerful of the Nephilim. These giants became leaders among their people and taught the others how to dominate humans even more effectively. As the giants multiplied and spread across the earth, they began to cause problems everywhere they went. They would arrive in a human community and immediately demand that the people serve them. They would take the best houses for themselves and force the humans to build even better ones. They would eat most of the food and leave the humans with barely enough to survive. The giants also began to fight among themselves. Their supernatural strength and aggressive nature made them prone to violence. When two giants disagreed about something, their fights would be so destructive that they could destroy entire areas. Buildings would be smashed, trees would be uprooted, and sometimes humans would be killed just by being in the way. But perhaps the most disturbing thing about the giants was their attitude toward life itself. Because they were so powerful, and because they had never learned to respect others, they began to see violence as normal and acceptable. They killed animals for sport, not just for food. They destroyed things simply because they could. They showed no mercy to those who were weaker than themselves. the human population began to live in fear of the giants. People would hide when they heard that giants were coming to their area. Parents would try to keep their children safe by teaching them to run and hide whenever they saw one of these enormous beings approaching. Some humans tried to fight back against the giants, but it was hopeless. No human weapon could seriously hurt these supernatural beings. No human army was strong enough to defeat even one giant, let alone many of them. The giants seemed to be invincible, and they knew it. This knowledge of their own power made the giants even more arrogant and cruel. They began to think of themselves as gods who could do whatever they wanted without consequences. They forgot that they had been created beings, just like humans, and that there was still a true God in heaven who was watching everything they did. The birth and growth of the Nephilim giants marked the beginning of the most violent and wicked period in human history. These beings, who combined the power of angels with the physical form of humans, became a plague upon the earth that would eventually force God to take drastic action to save the human race from complete destruction. Chapter 5. The Book of Enoch reveals the truth. For many centuries, the Book of Enoch was lost to most of the world. But when it was rediscovered, it revealed secrets about the giants that had been hidden for thousands of years. The Book of Enoch is one of the most important ancient books that most people have never heard of. It was written thousands of years ago, probably around 300 years before Jesus was born. But it tells about events that happened much earlier, in the time before the Great Flood. The book claims to be written by Enoch, who was the great-grandfather of Noah. The Bible tells us that Enoch was a special man who walked with God. Unlike other people, Enoch did not die in the normal way. Instead, God took him up to heaven while he was still alive. The Bible says, Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. According to the Book of Enoch, while Enoch was in heaven, God showed him many secrets about the past and the future. Enoch saw what had really happened when the Watchers came to earth. He learned the truth about how the giants were born and why they became so evil. God told Enoch to write down these secrets so that future generations would understand what had happened. For many centuries after it was written, the Book of Enoch was very popular among Jewish and early Christian communities. Many important religious teachers quoted from it. Some of the writers of the New Testament seem to have known about it. The Book of Jude in the Bible even quotes directly from the Book of Enoch. But as time went on, many religious leaders became uncomfortable with the Book of Enoch. They thought it was too strange or too frightening for ordinary people to read. Some believed that its descriptions of angels and giants were too detailed and might confuse people about what the Bible taught. Gradually, the book disappeared from most libraries and was forgotten by most people. For over 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch was almost completely lost in Europe and the Middle East. Scholars knew that it had once existed because other ancient writers mentioned it, but no one could find a complete copy of the actual book. Many people assumed that it had been lost forever. Then, in the 1700s, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled to Ethiopia in Africa There, he made an amazing discovery. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had preserved complete copies of the Book of Enoch in their ancient language. They had been reading and studying this book for hundreds of years, even when the rest of the world had forgotten about it. Bruce brought back several copies of the Book of Enoch to Europe. Scholars began to translate it into English and other modern languages. For the first time in many centuries, people could read Enoch's account of what had really happened in the days before the flood. What they found was shocking. The Book of Enoch provided a detailed explanation of the mysterious verses in Genesis chapter 6 about the sons of God and the daughters of men. It explained exactly who the Nephilim were and where they had come from. It described the rebellion of the Watchers and the birth of the giants in vivid detail. The book revealed that the giants were not just mythological creatures or exaggerated stories about tall people. According to Enoch, they were literal descendants of fallen angels who had enormous size and supernatural powers. These beings had corrupted the earth and filled it with violence and wickedness. The Book of Enoch also explained why God had decided to send the Great Flood. It was not just because humans were sinful, although that was true. The main reason was that the giants and their Watcher fathers had corrupted human nature itself. They had introduced knowledge and practices that were turning humans into something evil and unnatural. According to Enoch, God realized that if he allowed the giants to continue multiplying and spreading their influence, the entire human race would become so corrupted that it could never be redeemed. The flood was necessary to destroy the giants and their corrupt offspring, and to give humanity a fresh start through Noah and his family. The book also revealed the fate of the Watchers themselves. When God saw what they had done, he was furious. He sent the archangel Michael and other loyal angels to capture the rebel Watchers and bind them in chains. They were imprisoned in a dark place until the final judgment, when they would be punished forever for their rebellion. But the Book of Enoch made it clear that the influence of the Watchers and their giant children did not end with the flood. Some of the knowledge they had taught humans survived and continued to corrupt people in later generations. Some of the spirits of the dead giants also remained active, becoming the demons that would trouble humans throughout history. Modern scholars have different opinions about the Book of Enoch. Some believe it is a reliable historical account that preserves true information about ancient events. Others think it is a work of religious fiction that uses symbolic language to teach spiritual truths. Still others see it as an important document that shows what some ancient people believed, even if those beliefs were not necessarily accurate. But regardless of what scholars think about its historical accuracy, the Book of Enoch has had a powerful influence on how people understand the Bible and ancient history. It provides a framework for understanding some of the most mysterious passages in Scripture. It offers explanations for the origin of evil, the existence of demons, and the reason for the flood that many people find compelling. The rediscovery of the Book of Enoch has also sparked new interest in the question of whether giants really existed in ancient times. If Enoch's account is true, then the giants mentioned in the Bible were not just tall humans or mythological creatures. They were literal descendants of angels who possessed supernatural abilities and had a profound impact on human history. Today, more and more people are reading the Book of Enoch and considering its claims. Some see it as providing crucial missing pieces to the puzzle of ancient history. Others use it to better understand biblical passages that have always seemed confusing or incomplete. Whatever one's opinion about its reliability, the Book of Enoch offers a fascinating and detailed account of one of the most mysterious periods in human history. Chapter 6: What the Watchers Taught Mankind. The Watchers did not just marry human women and have giant children. They also shared knowledge that was meant to stay secret. This forbidden knowledge changed human civilization forever. According to the Book of Enoch, each of the 200 Watchers who came to Earth had special knowledge and abilities. When they decided to live among humans, they began teaching these secrets to their wives and to other people. But this knowledge was not meant for humans to have, and it caused terrible problems. The leader of the Watchers, Semjaza, taught humans about spells and magic. He showed them how to use supernatural power to control other people and to make things happen that seemed impossible. This was the beginning of witchcraft and sorcery among humans. People learned that they could use spiritual forces to get what they wanted, even if it meant hurting others. Another Watcher, named Azazel, taught humans how to make weapons of war. Before the Watchers came, humans had only simple tools made of wood and stone. But Azazel showed them how to find metals in the ground and how to work with fire to shape these metals into swords, spears, and shields. He taught them how to make armor to protect themselves in battle and how to craft better weapons to defeat their enemies. This knowledge of metalworking might seem like a good thing, but it led to much more violence and war among humans. Before they had metal weapons, people could not hurt each other as badly when they fought. But with sharp metal swords and spears, conflicts became much more deadly. Wars became more common because people now had better tools for fighting. Azazel also taught humans, especially women, about cosmetics and jewelry. He showed them how to make beautiful ornaments from gold and silver. He taught them how to use paint and powders to make themselves more attractive. He showed them how to dye fabrics in bright colors and how to create beautiful clothing and decorations. While these things might not seem harmful, they led to pride and vanity among humans. People began to care more about how they looked than about how they acted. They became jealous of others who had more beautiful things. The focus on outward beauty distracted people from developing inner goodness and character. A Watcher named Armaros taught humans about magic and enchantments. He showed them how to cast spells that could influence other people's thoughts and actions. He taught them how to make potions that could heal or harm. He revealed the secrets of communicating with spiritual beings and how to call upon supernatural powers for help. This magical knowledge gave some humans power over others, but it also opened doorways for evil spirits to influence human affairs. When people began practicing magic, they often found themselves dealing with demons and other dark forces that they could not control. What started as a way to gain power often ended up enslaving people to evil influences. Barakijal taught humans about astrology and the movements of the stars and planets. He showed them how to predict the future by watching the sky and how to choose the best times for important activities based on the positions of celestial bodies. He revealed the secret meanings behind eclipses, comets, and other heavenly events. While knowledge of astronomy can be useful, the astrology that Barakijal taught led people to believe that their lives were controlled by the stars, rather than by their own choices or by God. People began to think that they could not change their fate, and that everything was determined by forces beyond their control. This discouraged them from taking responsibility for their actions and from trusting in God's guidance. Kokabel taught humans about the signs and omens in nature. He showed them how to interpret the meaning of unusual weather patterns, the behavior of animals, and other natural phenomena. He taught them to look for hidden messages in everyday events and to use these signs to predict what would happen in the future. This knowledge led to superstition and fear among humans. Instead of trusting in God's providence, people became anxious about every unusual event, wondering if it was a sign of coming disaster. They began to make important decisions based on omens rather than on wisdom and careful thought. Other watchers taught humans about medicine and healing, but they also showed them how to make poisons and drugs. They revealed the properties of plants and herbs, including which ones could cure diseases and which ones could cause harm. While some of this knowledge was beneficial, it was also used to hurt people and to create powerful substances that could control people's minds and bodies. The Watchers also taught humans about advanced building techniques and engineering. They showed them how to construct large buildings and monuments that would last for thousands of years. This knowledge led to the creation of impressive structures, but it also encouraged human pride and the desire to build monuments to their own glory rather than to honor God. Perhaps most importantly, the Watchers taught humans that they did not need to depend on God for knowledge and guidance. They showed humans that there were other sources of power and wisdom that they could tap into. This was the same lie that Satan had told Eve in the Garden of Eden when he promised that she could become like God if she ate the forbidden fruit. All of this forbidden knowledge had a corrupting effect on human society. People became more violent, more selfish, and more focused on material pleasures. They began to worship power and beauty instead of goodness and truth. They started to believe that they could solve all their problems through magic and technology, rather than through faith and righteousness. The knowledge that the Watchers shared also created inequality among humans. Those who learned the secrets had great advantages over those who did not. This led to the development of different classes of people, with some ruling over others based on their access to supernatural knowledge and power. Most tragically, the influence of the Watchers led humans to forget their relationship with God. Instead of looking to their Creator for guidance and help, people began to rely on the knowledge and power that the fallen angels had given them. This spiritual corruption was even worse than the physical violence and moral decay that resulted from the presence of the giants. The Book of Enoch makes it clear that the knowledge shared by the Watchers was one of the main reasons why God decided to send the flood. The corruption of human nature through forbidden knowledge was so complete that only a complete restart of human civilization could solve the problem. The flood was necessary not just to destroy the giants, but also to wash away the corrupting influence of the fallen angels' teachings. Chapter 7. The Giants Turn Evil. As the giant children of the Watchers grew larger and more powerful, they also became more wicked. What started as a hunger for food became a hunger for destruction and violence. At first, the main problem with the giants was simply their enormous appetites. They ate so much food that human communities could barely keep up with their needs. But as the giants grew older and larger, their behavior became much worse. They were not content just to eat a lot of food. They began to demand that humans serve them in every way. The giants saw themselves as a superior race that was meant to rule over ordinary humans. After all, they were much bigger, much stronger, and much more powerful than any human. They had inherited supernatural abilities from their Watcher fathers, and they had learned secret knowledge that gave them even more advantages. But power without wisdom or compassion always leads to cruelty. The giants had no understanding of right and wrong. They had never learned to control their desires or to think about how their actions affected others. They simply took whatever they wanted and did whatever pleased them, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The Book of Enoch tells us that the giants consumed all the food that humans could produce. When farmers brought in their harvest, the giants would take most or all of it for themselves. When hunters caught animals, the giants would claim the meat. Soon, ordinary humans were struggling just to find enough food to survive. But the giants were still not satisfied. When they had eaten all the crops and all the domestic animals, they began to hunt wild animals. They killed deer, bears, lions, and every other creature they could find. Their supernatural size and strength made them incredibly effective hunters, and they quickly began to wipe out the animal populations in large areas. Even this was not enough to satisfy the giants' endless hunger. According to the Book of Enoch, when they had consumed all the animals they could find, the giants began to do something truly horrible. They began to eat humans. At first, perhaps they only ate humans who had died from other causes, but soon they were actively hunting and killing people to use as food. The giants had become cannibals who saw ordinary humans not as fellow intelligent beings, but as just another source of meat. This cannibalism was not just about hunger, it was also about power and intimidation. By eating humans, the giants were showing that they considered people to be nothing more than animals. It was the ultimate expression of their contempt for the human race. The giants also began to fight among themselves. Their aggressive nature and supernatural strength made their conflicts incredibly destructive. When two giants disagreed about something, their fight could destroy entire villages or forests. The ground would shake from their battles, and the noise could be heard for miles around. These fights between giants were not just brief arguments. They were violent wars that could last for days or weeks. The giants would use trees as weapons, throw huge rocks at each other, and wrestle with such force that they would change the shape of the landscape. Sometimes, these battles would kill humans who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But perhaps the worst thing about the giants was how they influenced ordinary humans to become more violent and wicked. Humans who lived near the giants began to copy their behavior. They learned to settle disagreements through violence rather than through discussion. They began to take what they wanted by force rather than by working or trading for it. The giants also taught humans new forms of wickedness that people had never thought of before. They showed humans how to be more effective in their cruelty and how to cause more suffering to their enemies. Under the influence of the giants, human society became more brutal and savage than it had ever been. Some humans even began to worship the giants as gods. They brought offerings to these enormous beings and asked them for favors. They built shrines and altars where they could honor the giants and seek their protection. This was exactly the opposite of what God wanted, which was for humans to worship Him alone. The giants enjoyed being worshipped by humans. It fed their pride and made them feel even more superior. They began to demand more and more elaborate forms of worship. They wanted the best food, the most beautiful decorations, and the most expensive gifts that humans could provide. Some giants even demanded human sacrifice. They told their human worshippers to kill other people as offerings to demonstrate their devotion. This practice spread the violence and wickedness even further, as humans learned to murder their own kind in the name of pleasing these false gods. The Book of Enoch also tells us that the giants began to sin against other kinds of creatures besides humans. They attacked and tormented birds, fish, and reptiles. They seemed to take pleasure in causing suffering to any living thing they encountered. Their cruelty was not limited to their own species, or even to creatures that were threatening to them. Perhaps most disturbing of all, the giants began to drink blood. According to ancient accounts, they would kill animals and humans and then drink their blood while it was still warm. This practice was particularly horrifying to ancient people who believed that the life of a creature was in its blood. By drinking blood, the giants were consuming the life force of other beings. All of these evil practices spread throughout the world as the giants multiplied and moved to different areas. Wherever they went, they brought violence, cannibalism, and wickedness with them. Human communities that had once been peaceful became centers of brutality and evil. The earth itself seemed to suffer under the weight of so much wickedness. The Book of Enoch says that the ground cried out to God because of all the violence and bloodshed that was taking place. The natural order that God had established was being destroyed by these unnatural beings and their evil influence. God looked down from heaven and saw what the giants and their watcher fathers had done to His creation. The world that He had made to be good and beautiful had become a place of horror and evil. The humans that He had created in His own image were being corrupted and destroyed by these hybrid beings who should never have existed. It was at this point that God decided He had to take action. The wickedness of the giants and the corruption they had spread throughout human society had become so great that only the most drastic measures could solve the problem. The time had come to destroy the giants and give the human race a chance to start over. Chapter 8. God sees the wickedness. When God looked down from heaven and saw what the Watchers and their giant children had done to the earth, his heart was filled with sorrow and anger. The time had come for judgment. The Bible tells us that God sees everything that happens on earth. Nothing is hidden from his sight. He had watched as the Watchers left their positions in heaven and came down to marry human women. He had seen the birth of the giant Nephilim and observed how they grew in size and wickedness. He had witnessed all the violence, cannibalism, and corruption that had spread throughout the world. According to the Book of Enoch, the faithful angels in heaven were also watching what was happening on earth. They were horrified by what they saw. The rebellion of their fellow angels and the evil of the giants was a great grief to them. They knew that something had to be done to stop the wickedness before it completely destroyed God's creation. 4 of the most important archangels came before God to report on the situation. These were Michael, the warrior angel who led God's army; Gabriel, the messenger angel who brought God's words to people; Raphael, the healing angel; and Uriel, the angel of God's judgment. They told God about all the terrible things that were happening on earth. The archangels reported that the Watchers had revealed secrets to humans that were never supposed to be shared. They had taught people how to make weapons, practice magic, and worship false gods. They had corrupted human nature by sharing knowledge that led people away from God and toward evil. The archangels also told God about the giants and their terrible deeds. They described how these enormous beings were eating all the food that humans could produce and then turning to cannibalism when that was not enough. They reported on the violence and bloodshed that the giants were spreading throughout the world. Most importantly, the archangels told God that the corruption had become so widespread that it was affecting the entire human race. The wickedness was not limited to just the giants and their immediate followers. It was spreading like a disease throughout human society, turning people away from God and toward evil. When God heard these reports, the Bible tells us that he was sorry that he had made humans. It says that God's heart was filled with grief because of how wicked people had become. This does not mean that God made a mistake when he created humans. Rather, it shows how much it hurt him to see his beloved creation being corrupted and destroyed. God realized that the situation had become so bad that ordinary measures would not be enough to fix it. The giants were too powerful for humans to defeat on their own. The knowledge that the Watchers had shared was too corrupting to be simply forgotten. The evil practices that had developed were too deeply rooted to be easily changed. The Book of Enoch tells us that God decided to take action in several different ways. First, he would punish the Watchers who had caused all the trouble by leaving heaven and corrupting the earth. Second, he would destroy the giants who were terrorizing and eating humans. Third, he would cleanse the earth of all the wickedness through a great flood that would give humanity a fresh start. God called the archangel Michael and gave him a special mission. Michael was to go to Semjaza, the leader of the rebel watchers, and tell him that his punishment was coming. God said that Semjaza and his followers would be bound in chains and imprisoned in darkness until the final judgment day. The archangel Gabriel was sent to destroy the giants. God told Gabriel to cause the giants to fight against each other until they destroyed themselves. Since the giants were naturally violent and aggressive, it would not be difficult to turn them against one another. Their own evil nature would be used as the instrument of their destruction. The archangel Raphael was given the task of binding Azazel, the watcher who had taught humans how to make weapons and practice various forms of wickedness. Azazel was to be tied up and thrown into a pit in the desert, where he would remain in darkness until the final judgment. The archangel Uriel was sent to warn Noah about the coming flood. God had chosen Noah because he was one of the few men on earth who still tried to live righteously and follow God's commands. Noah was told to build a great ark that would save him, his family, and representatives of all the animal species from the flood that was coming. But before the flood came, God wanted to give the giants and the corrupt humans one last chance to repent of their wickedness. He sent Enoch, who had been taken up to heaven while still alive, back to earth with a message for the watchers. Enoch appeared to the watchers and told them that God had seen all their evil deeds. He warned them that judgment was coming and that they would be punished for their rebellion against God. He urged them to repent and ask for God's forgiveness while there was still time. But the watchers did not listen to Enoch's warning. They had become so proud and so convinced of their own power that they could not believe that God would actually punish them. They thought they were too important and too strong for God to destroy them. Their pride blinded them to the reality of their situation. The giants also ignored the warnings that came through Enoch. They continued their violent and evil ways, believing that their great size and strength made them invincible. They could not imagine that anything could threaten them or force them to change their behavior. Even many of the ordinary humans who had been corrupted by the influence of the Watchers and Giants refused to listen to the warnings about coming judgment. They had become so accustomed to violence and wickedness that they thought it was normal. They could not understand why God would be angry about the way they were living. As the time for judgment drew near, the faithful angels began to prepare for their missions. Michael gathered his army of loyal angels and prepared to fight against the rebel watchers. Gabriel planned how he would turn the giants against each other. Raphael prepared the prison where Azazel would be confined. Uriel made ready to deliver God's message to Noah. Meanwhile, the wickedness on earth continued to grow worse. The giants became even more violent and cruel. The humans who followed them became even more corrupt and evil. It seemed as though the entire world was racing toward complete moral collapse. But God had not forgotten his promise to preserve the human race. Even in the midst of all the evil, there were still a few people like Noah who tried to live righteously. God's plan was not to destroy humanity completely, but to remove the corrupting influence of the giants and give the survivors a chance to build a better world. The stage was set for the greatest act of divine judgment in human history. The flood was coming, and with it would come the end of the age of the giants. The world would be washed clean of the wickedness that had corrupted it, and humanity would have a second chance to live according to God's will. Chapter 9: The Great Flood and What Happened After. When God's judgment finally came, it was more complete and devastating than anyone could have imagined. The flood did not just destroy the giants, it changed the entire world forever. The Bible tells us the story of the Great Flood in the Book of Genesis. God told Noah to build a huge boat called an ark that would be big enough to hold his family and 2 of every kind of animal. Noah obeyed God's command, even though it must have seemed strange to build such a large boat when there was no body of water nearby big enough to float it. The people who lived around Noah thought he was crazy for building such a huge boat on dry land. The giants and the corrupt humans laughed at him and mocked his work. They could not believe that God would actually flood the entire world. They thought they were too powerful for anything to threaten them. But Noah continued to work on the ark because he trusted God's word. The Book of Enoch tells us that Noah also served as a preacher during this time, warning people about the coming judgment and urging them to repent of their wickedness. However, very few people listened to his warnings. When the ark was finally finished, God told Noah to gather his family and load the animals into the boat. Then something amazing happened. The Bible says that God himself shut the door of the ark, sealing Noah and his family safely inside. This was God's way of showing that he was personally protecting those who had remained faithful to him. Then the rain began. At first, it might have seemed like an ordinary rainstorm. But this rain did not stop after a few hours or even a few days. It continued day and night for 40 days and 40 nights. The Bible also tells us that the fountains of the great deep burst forth, which means that water came pouring up from underground sources as well as falling from the sky. As the water level rose, the giants probably thought they could survive because of their enormous size. After all, they were much taller than ordinary humans, so they could wade through deeper water. But the flood was not just a few feet deep. It covered even the highest mountains on earth. The Book of Enoch tells us that the giants tried to save themselves as the waters rose higher and higher. Some of them may have tried to build boats or rafts, but they had never needed to learn such skills because they had always been so powerful on land. Others may have tried to climb to the tops of the highest mountains, but even these were eventually covered by the flood. One by one, the mighty giants who had terrorized the earth for so long were drowned by the rising waters. These beings who had seemed invincible were powerless against God's judgment. Their great size and strength could not save them from the flood that covered the entire world. The watchers who had caused all the trouble were also judged at this time. According to the Book of Enoch, the archangel Michael and his angels captured the rebel watchers and bound them with chains. They were imprisoned in a dark place where they would remain until the final judgment at the end of time. Azazel, the watcher who had taught humans how to make weapons and practice witchcraft, was thrown into a pit in the desert and covered with rocks. He was bound so tightly that he could not escape, and he was left in complete darkness. His punishment would serve as a warning to any other angels who might be tempted to rebel against God. The flood waters stayed on the earth for about a year. During this time, every living thing that breathed air and lived on land was destroyed, except for those who were safe in Noah's ark. The Bible says that everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. This included all the giants, all the corrupt humans, and all the animals that had not been saved in the ark. But the flood did more than just kill the giants and corrupt humans. It also washed away all the evidence of their civilization. The cities they had built, the monuments they had erected, and the weapons they had made were all destroyed and buried under layers of mud and sediment. The world was literally washed clean of their influence. When the flood waters finally receded, Noah and his family came out of the ark to find a very different world. The landscape had been completely changed. Mountains had been worn down, valleys had been filled in, and new rivers had been carved out by the rushing waters. It was truly a new world for the human race to inhabit. The first thing Noah did was build an altar and offer sacrifices to God to thank him for their salvation. God was pleased with Noah's offerings and made a covenant with him. God promised that he would never again destroy the world with a flood, and he put a rainbow in the sky as a sign of this promise. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the fathers of all the people who would live on earth after the flood. All modern humans are descendants of these 3 men and their wives. This means that everyone who lives today is related to Noah and his family. For a while after the flood, it seemed as though the world would be a much better place. The giants were gone, the corrupt watchers were imprisoned, and the only humans left were Noah's family, who had been chosen because of their righteousness. The earth could start fresh, without the corrupting influence of the hybrid giants. But the Book of Enoch reveals something troubling about what happened after the flood. Even though the physical bodies of the giants had been destroyed, their spirits did not simply disappear. According to Enoch, the spirits of the dead giants became demons that would continue to trouble humanity throughout history. These demonic spirits retained some of the knowledge and evil nature of their giant fathers. They could influence humans to commit acts of violence and wickedness. They could teach people the same corrupt practices that the original Watchers had shared. In this way, some of the evil that had existed before the flood managed to survive and continue affecting the world. The Book of Enoch also suggests that not all of the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers had taught was completely lost in the flood. Some of it may have been preserved in the memories of Noah's family or in written records that survived the disaster. This knowledge would later resurface and once again lead humans away from God. Most shocking of all, the Bible indicates that giants appeared on earth again even after the flood. The Book of Numbers tells us that when the Israelites were preparing to enter the Promised Land, they encountered giants called the Anakim, who were descendants of the Nephilim. This raises the difficult question of how giants could exist after the flood if all the original giants had been destroyed. There are different theories about how this could have happened. Some scholars believe that the sons of God, mentioned in Genesis 6, were not angels, but were the descendants of Seth, who intermarried with the descendants of Cain, and that this process could have happened again after the flood. Others think that some of the Watchers who had not been imprisoned might have repeated their original sin and again produced giant offspring. Whatever the explanation, it is clear that the flood, while it solved the immediate problem of the antediluvian giants, did not permanently end the presence of these unusual beings on Earth. The battle between good and evil that had begun with the rebellion of the Watchers would continue throughout human history, sometimes involving giants and other supernatural beings. Chapter 10. Giants. After the flood, the Nephilim return. Even though the Great Flood destroyed the original giants, the Bible tells us that giants appeared on Earth again. This raises many questions about how this could have happened and what it means. After Noah and his family left the ark and began to repopulate the earth, everything seemed peaceful for a while. The sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, had children, and their children had children. Gradually, human civilization began to rebuild itself in the new world that had emerged after the flood. But as the generations passed, some disturbing developments began to occur. The Bible gives us hints that not everything was as perfect as it seemed in the post-flood world. Human nature still contained the potential for evil, and some of the same problems that had existed before the flood began to reappear. One of the most shocking revelations comes in the Book of Numbers, chapter 13. This passage describes what happened when Moses sent 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan, which God had promised to give to the Israelites. When the spies returned, 10 of them gave a frightening report about what they had seen. The spies said that the land was indeed good and fertile, just as God had promised. But they also reported that it was inhabited by very strong and dangerous people. Most alarming of all, they said they had seen giants there. The Bible records their exact words. "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This statement is shocking because it clearly says that Nephilim still existed hundreds of years after the flood that was supposed to have destroyed all the giants. How could this be possible? If all the original Nephilim had drowned in the flood, where did these new giants come from? There are several theories that scholars have proposed to explain this mystery. One possibility is that the spies were exaggerating or were so frightened by the large people they saw that they called them Nephilim, even though they were not actually the same kind of beings as the pre-flood giants. Another theory is that some of the Watchers who had not been imprisoned after the first rebellion repeated their sin and again came to Earth to take human wives. This would have resulted in a new generation of giant offspring, similar to what had happened before the flood. A third possibility is that the genetic potential for unusual size somehow survived the flood in Noah's family line and reappeared in later generations. The Bible tells us that one of Noah's sons, Ham, did something that caused Noah to curse his grandson Canaan. Some scholars think this incident might be related to the later appearance of giants in the land of Canaan. Whatever the explanation, it is clear that giants were indeed present in the land of Canaan when the Israelites arrived. These giants were not just tall people, they were apparently so large and intimidating that experienced warriors were afraid to fight them. The spies said they felt like grasshoppers compared to these giants. The Bible gives us more details about these post-flood giants in other passages. We learn that they were organized into different tribes or clans, with names like the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Zamzumim. Each of these groups seemed to have its own territory and its own characteristics. The Anakim were perhaps the most famous of the post-flood giants. They were named after their ancestor, Anak, and they lived in the southern part of the land of Canaan. The Bible tells us that 3 of Anak's sons, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, were particularly well-known giants who controlled the city of Hebron. The Rephaim were another group of giants who lived east of the Jordan River. Their name means the dead ones, or the shades, which suggests that they may have been connected in some way to the spirits of the original Nephilim who had died in the flood. The Rephaim were apparently very numerous and controlled large areas of territory. The Emim were giants who lived in the land that would later belong to the nation of Moab. The Bible says they were a people great and numerous, and as tall as the Anakim. Their name means the terrible ones, which suggests that they were particularly fierce and frightening. The Zamzumim were giants who lived in the territory that would become the land of the Ammonites. Like the other giant clans, they were described as being very large and strong. The Ammonites called them by this name, but they may have been related to the Rephaim. These various giant clans seem to have been scattered throughout the region around the Promised Land. They controlled many of the strongest cities and most fertile areas. This meant that when God told the Israelites to take possession of the land he had promised them, they would have to defeat these powerful giants to do so.